And again, every clinic is a little bit different, and I think that probably the US might be a little bit different from Europe or other countries, not for good and for bad, just a different style. And I would say that in the US nowadays, the majority of the embryo transfer are done with something called frozen embryo transfer, meaning we do not do a fresh cycle like we used to do in the old days. In the old days, we used to find an egg donor, then prepare the mom for implantation, and then once the eggs are out, embryos were transferred back fresh. Nowadays, we don't do it for one of the main reason is we do test embryos. I think most clinics in the US tend to test the embryos because we know that even on an egg donor, you can have about 40% or 50% of the embryos being abnormal. So we do recommend testing them to make sure that we have a good success rate. And testing the embryos require freezing them. The second, technology of freezing nowadays changed so much over the last 15 years. Like years ago, we're afraid of freezing embryos because success rate wasn't as good. The thawing wasn't good and we were compromised the embryos. Nowadays, I would say that in our clinic, as well as many others, 98% of the cycles are done with frozen embryos, and success rate is 70, 80%. So technology changed a lot, and now we're not worried about freezing embryos. Um, Now, I know that this is not the topic, but sometimes it's very counterintuitive. You think about something as delicate as embryo and said, are you sure there won't be any damage and doesn't affect genetics and so on? But we've done so many studies over that over the years. And although counterintuitive, actually embryos do very well frozen. And I would say that in regular IVF cycles, not egg donation, there is even an argument that frozen embryo transfer is better because you put embryos back when the uterus is and the body is not stimulated with so many hormones. So there's a lot of other benefits of frozen embryo transfer. So we definitely, recommend not synchronizing the cycle. Find an egg donor, fertilize the eggs, check the embryos, freeze them. And at the end of this process, we know for each embryo the gender, male or female. Of course, if the couple or the single don't want to know the gender, we won't tell them, but we know the gender. We know whether the embryo is abnormal or normal, genetically, chromosome-wise. And we know something called grading of the embryo. So we know how strong is this embryo to implant. So we end this cycle having those embryos that we have so much knowledge about each of them, and that guarantee a much higher success rate compared to when we used to transfer embryos without knowing. I compare my practice years ago when we didn't test embryos, and I would say success rate would have been about 50%, and now we're up to 70, 80 because we have so much information on the embryos. Not to mention that nowadays embryos are kept for the future. So let's say somebody has one child, they want to have another one. They know ahead of time how many usable embryos they really have. Um, Technology nowadays of testing embryos is much more advanced. So now we don't just get normal, abnormal, we get much more information. They tell us about something called mosaic embryos, meaning embryos that have some normal cells, some abnormal cells. So the technology is very advanced, and I'm a big believer in it. And, that's why we do most of our cycle as frozen cycle.